Lewis Hamilton just led a Ferrari 1-2 through the final practice session before qualifying at the Hungaroring, over half a second clear of the rest of the field. Charles Leclerc had been fastest all morning before his own car came to a stop in the pit lane. By the end of Friday, George Russell walked out in front of the cameras and said the exact thing Mercedes had been dreading all week had actually happened. That is the story sitting on the timing screen right now. But there is a second set of numbers from that same Friday that almost nobody outside the two garages is talking about. It has nothing to do with a single fast lap. It is about who is actually quickest once the fuel tank is full and the tyres have gone off. And on that number, the team that just topped both sessions was not even close to the fastest car out on the circuit, and not by a small margin either. Not once you actually go looking at how the afternoon ended rather than how it started. So how does a team finish a session with the two quickest laps of the day and still walk away as the one with more questions to answer? Qualifying runs later today, and the race goes Sunday afternoon, and both of those sessions are about to test which version of Friday was actually real. This weekend is happening somewhere that makes both versions possible in the first place. The Hungaroring is nothing like Spa. There is no kilometre-long straight to punish a weak engine, no drag race into a first corner where raw horsepower decides who leads. The kind of layout where a small power deficit simply never gets the chance to show up on a stopwatch. It is tight, twisty and slow by Formula One standards. A circuit built from more than a dozen corners strung together with barely a breath between them, closer in character to a go-kart track than a power circuit. Overtaking here is famously difficult, which is exactly why qualifying position matters more at the Hungaroring than almost anywhere else Formula One visits. The layout rewards downforce and mechanical grip, the wing-generated stick that helps a car through a slow corner, and the pure suspension and tyre setup underneath it over almost anything else left on the calendar. It also tends to run hot and dusty by the time the weekend gets going, which changes tyre behaviour in ways that make long-run data even more valuable to a team trying to read the real picture. That combination, low-speed corners and a track surface that evolves fast, is exactly the kind of circuit that can hide an engine deficit instead of exposing it. And it is exactly the argument Sky Sports pundit Ted Kravitz has been making about this weekend. Fellow analyst Karun Chandhok backs it up by pointing to Ferrari's pace in Barcelona, another circuit that leans on downforce over straight-line speed, as proof the car can be genuinely strong on a layout like this. And Bernie Collins argues that Hungary and Zandvoort share the one trait that actually matters most this particular season, which is that neither track tests raw straight-line speed the way a genuine power circuit does. It is exactly why Ferrari walked into this weekend with more hope than it has carried into a Grand Prix in a while. Start with the morning. In first practice, Charles Leclerc set the fastest lap of the session, a 1 minute 19.075, and for a while it looked like Ferrari's whole weekend story was going to be about him. Max Verstappen was the closest challenger, 0.484 seconds back, with Hamilton third for Ferrari, 0.543 seconds off his own teammate. Isaac Hadjar was fourth, 0.922 seconds off the pace, and Russell fifth for Mercedes, already the better part of a second behind Leclerc before the day had even reached its second session, an early sign of exactly the gap that would define the rest of Friday. Then Leclerc's own morning ended early. His Ferrari came to a stop in the pit lane with what looked like a mechanical problem, and he spent the final minutes of the session watching from the garage instead of the cockpit. It was not the only red flag of the morning either. Lance Stroll spun off in Aston Martin's heavily reworked car after what the team suspected was a rear suspension failure, on a day when Aston Martin had brought a wave of new parts, reportedly numbering in the double digits, built specifically around this circuit. The red flag that followed ate into a session that was already short on green flag running, and it meant several teams further down the order lost track time they were never going to get back before qualifying. Kimi Antonelli did not even take part in first practice at all. Mercedes handed the session to reserve driver Frederik Vesti instead, which meant the championship leader's first look at the Hungaroring in 2026 came an hour and a half later than everyone else's. Second practice is where Ferrari actually made its statement. Hamilton went fastest with a 1 minute 18.729 and Leclerc slotted in right behind him, 0.148 seconds back. That is a Ferrari front row on raw pace, with nobody else within half a second of either car. Lando Norris was the best of the rest for McLaren, 0.499 seconds off Hamilton's time, running the team's newest upgrade parts for the first time. His teammate Oscar Piastri did not have those same parts fitted until this session and still could not match him. Verstappen was 0.692 seconds back in fourth, and Russell fifth again for Mercedes, 0.933 seconds off the pace. And then there was Antonelli. After missing the entire morning, the championship leader never even completed a clean lap on soft tyres in the afternoon. A red flag from Franco Colapinto's crash at the final corner and a mistake of his own conspiring to leave him down in 13th, 1.964 seconds off Hamilton's time. The red flag came at almost the worst possible point in the session, right as the top teams were lining up their own qualifying simulations, and it cost several drivers a shot at a clean lap on new tyres before the track went green again. On the timing screen, it did not just look like Ferrari's day. It looked like Mercedes was in real trouble. And it looked that way with the fastest team in both championships sitting right there to see it happen. Over the radio, the Mercedes drivers were not hiding it. Russell told his engineer the car felt dreadful, like it was completely out of balance under braking, the kind of complaint that usually means a long night for the setup engineers rather than a quick fix before Saturday. Antonelli came on a lap later, asking what on earth was going on after nearly spinning twice in the same corner. This is a team that arrived in Hungary as the championship leader in both standings, sitting comfortably ahead in the constructors' table too. And for most of Friday afternoon, its own drivers sounded like they were fighting the car rather than driving it. That kind of radio chatter does not usually come from the team on top of both championships, which is exactly what made it stand out to anyone listening in on the broadcast. And when George Russell finally stood in front of the cameras after the session, he did not try to spin it. He said the single lap pace simply was not there, that the long run had looked more competitive, but that what Mercedes had quietly feared from Ferrari all week had turned out to be exactly right. Ferrari, in his own words, was a good step ahead of everyone else on the grid right now. That is not a rival being polite. That is the team currently leading the Constructors' Championship, admitting, out loud, on camera, that the team chasing them just closed the distance in one afternoon. But the version everyone watched unfold on Friday afternoon is not the full picture. Underneath the times that decide who tops a practice session sheet, there is a second layer of data that matters just as much, and on Friday, it told a completely different story. Here is what actually separates the two numbers everyone is talking about this weekend. A single fast lap runs on a light fuel tank and a fresh set of tyres built to grip hard for one push and nothing else. It looks incredible on a graphic, and it decides where a car starts on Saturday. It has almost nothing to do with a Sunday afternoon. A long run does the opposite. Heavier fuel, tyres that have already given up their best grip, lap after lap, with no fresh rubber coming to rescue anyone. That is the closest thing to an actual race that happens on a Friday, and it is the number every engineer in the paddock trusts more than anything sitting on the earlier timing screen. Teams know this too, which is exactly why long-run pace almost never gets shown with the same fanfare as a purple sector time. It is slower, it is less exciting to watch, and it does not make for a dramatic graphic. It just happens to be the number that actually predicts Sunday. Race engineers watch it closely for exactly that reason, and so does anyone trying to seriously bet on how Sunday goes, because a purple sector time on a Friday afternoon has fooled plenty of people before. Once you adjust for the different fuel loads and tyre ages across the stints, Antonelli's long runs were the strongest of the entire field on Friday, and by a real margin. He was faster than Charles Leclerc's Ferrari by roughly 0.46 seconds a lap. On a circuit built from short, technical corners rather than long straights, a gap that size compounds fast over a race distance, turning into several real seconds by the time a stint is done. Hamilton was even further off the championship leader's pace than that. Over on the Red Bull side of the garage, Verstappen had spent the session complaining on the radio that the downshifts felt horrendous and that the car was jumping around like crazy, and the long-run numbers backed up exactly what he was feeling. Both Verstappen and Isaac Hadjar finished further behind Antonelli's long run than either Ferrari driver managed to be. Ferrari led every timing screen that gets shown on a broadcast, and still finished Friday looking like the team with more questions to answer than Mercedes did. A genuinely unusual position for a team that had just locked out the top of both sessions. That is the number nobody in the paddock is putting on a graphic, and it is the number that will actually matter once the lights go out on Sunday. A team can win the sheet and still lose the story sitting underneath it. While Friday's timesheets were being read as a Ferrari statement, the more interesting story was happening underneath the bodywork, somewhere no camera ever points. Ferrari built its entire 2026 power unit around a smaller turbocharger, a deliberate bet chasing a launch advantage under the sport's new engine rules. At a moment when most of the grid was designing around a more conventional layout instead, a smaller turbo spins up faster and recovers energy quicker in short bursts, which is exactly what a standing start rewards. The trade-off is sustained power over a longer stretch of track, and on paper, that trade-off looked worth making, the kind of specific edge that can define a season if the rules stay still long enough to exploit it. In practice, that advantage barely survived contact with the season. The FIA brought in a mandatory 5-second procedure before every race start, and it erased exactly the kind of head start Ferrari's design was built around before Ferrari ever got to use it in anger. What was left behind is a weakness in how the power unit deploys its energy across a lap, the electrical boost from the hybrid system running out of steam under sustained load instead of one short qualifying-style burst. That is precisely the kind of weakness a long run at full fuel on tyres that are giving up grip is built to expose. Ferrari already knows exactly where the fix is, it just is not here yet. The fix Ferrari is working toward already has a rough timeline attached to it. Multiple reports point to a reworked turbocharger, keeping the same impeller diameter but changing the blade count, the blade angle, and the materials inside it, arriving no earlier than the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort or the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, both sitting on the other side of the summer break. Until that part actually bolts onto the car, everything else Ferrari does is a workaround rather than a cure, and every circuit left on the calendar in the meantime is being read through one question. Does the layout hide this weakness, or does it expose it? At Spa 2 weeks ago, Ferrari answered a different version of the same problem with aerodynamics. Instead of engine work, debuting an updated rotating rear wing and removing a device from ahead of the exhaust to cut drag down the straights. The Hungaroring got its own small addition to that same wing this weekend, an extra winglet built specifically for a track with barely any straights to speak of. An aero tweak can hide a weakness on the right layout. It cannot fix one on every layout. The actual fix is still sitting on the other side of a summer break Ferrari has not reached yet, which means every strong weekend before then comes with the same asterisk attached. There is a strange irony sitting in that timeline too. Zandvoort, one of the 2 circuits earmarked for the new turbocharger, is itself a low-speed, high downforce track, not far removed in character from the Hungaroring. Ferrari may end up masking the same weakness twice before it actually gets to fix it. Monza, a genuine power circuit where there is nowhere left to hide a straight-line deficit, is where this story finally gets told in full, without an asterisk attached to it anywhere. None of this was lost on Ferrari's own side of the garage. Charles Leclerc stood in the press pen after second practice and did not sound like a driver who had just topped the timesheet twice in one day. Ferrari drivers have given some version of this same warning after Friday sessions before, and it has usually turned out to be the correct read. It is going to be tight tomorrow, as always, he said. I do not expect us to be having the gap that we have had today, so we will have to do everything perfectly. Team principal Fred Vasseur, standing a few feet away and asked almost the identical question, was just as careful with his own words. He called Friday so far so good. The kind of phrase a team principal reaches for when he does not want to promise anything, before adding that it is not on a Friday that you take pole, and even less that you win a race, and that Saturday would be a completely different story. Coming from the 2 people who just watched their cars finish more than half a second clear of the field twice in one afternoon, that level of caution says something on its own. They have seen the same long-run numbers everyone else is only just finding out about, and they know exactly how little a Friday advantage at the Hungaroring has meant in past years, because Ferrari has led Friday sessions before, without ever converting that pace into a Sunday result. McLaren watched all of this unfold from just outside the top 2, close enough in both championships that neither a Ferrari surge nor a Mercedes recovery is good news for them, and its own read on the weekend was about as neutral as it gets. Oscar Piastri, who did not even run the team's newest parts until the second session, and still ended up closer to the front than his form all weekend suggested he might, put it about as plainly as a rival driver ever does. The Ferraris have looked very quick in both sessions, he said. Mercedes is very hard to read. Everyone would find out more on Saturday. Piastri is not picking a side there. He is admitting that Friday at the Hungaroring genuinely did not give a clean answer, and it lines up with everything the numbers already show. One team is fast in a straight comparison of single laps, another team is fast once the fuel burns off. Neither picture is complete on its own, and McLaren, sitting close enough to both to have skin in the outcome, is not pretending to know which one wins out. For a team that spent large parts of this season fighting off both of them, that kind of uncertainty from a rival garage is not nothing either. Friday was not short on other drama either. Aston Martin brought that heavily reworked car built specifically around this circuit and lost most of the session's value when Stroll spun off with the suspected rear suspension failure, while teammate Fernando Alonso continued running the new parts without the same drama, giving the team at least some clean data from an afternoon that otherwise went sideways. A double-digit parts count on one car in one weekend is a serious overhaul by modern Formula One standards, and it says something about how much Aston Martin was banking on this specific circuit before a single lap even started. Colapinto put his Alpine into the barrier at the final corner in the afternoon, triggering the red flag that cost Antonelli his last real shot at a clean lap on soft tyres, which is a large part of why his single lap time looks so much worse than his long run actually was. None of it changed the two numbers that actually matter this weekend. It just meant Friday at the Hungaroring came with almost as many red flags as it did genuine answers, and it means at least one of those numbers, Antonelli's, is arguably softer than it looks, purely because of how the afternoon unfolded around him. Zoom out for a second. And this Friday means more than just one circuit. Antonelli leads Hamilton by 45 points in the drivers' standings, with Russell 5 points further back in third and Leclerc fourth, and Mercedes sitting 73 points clear of Ferrari in the constructors' table. 45 points is close to 2 full race wins, the kind of gap that does not close in a single afternoon no matter how good the timesheet reads. Hamilton has already said publicly, in his own words, that he genuinely believes he can fight for this championship. A Friday, like this one, is exactly the kind of evidence that belief needs if it is going to survive contact with a scoreboard, and it makes every session between now and the summer break count for more than a normal mid-season weekend usually would. McLaren sit close behind in both championships too, which means Ferrari is not just racing Mercedes for these points, it is racing the clock. Every session left before the whole paddock disappears for a few weeks is one of a shrinking number of chances to actually cut into that lead rather than just talk about doing it. A single lap advantage at the Hungaroring is worth nothing if it does not turn into pole position on Saturday and points on Sunday. And if Friday's long-run data really is the more accurate preview of Sunday afternoon, a fast lap on a Friday might end up being worth exactly nothing at all. A real recovery for Ferrari does not look like one strong session. It looks like backing this exact Friday up with a genuine result on Sunday, something the team has not always managed to do this year, even after leading a practice session by a similar margin. So which number actually wins this weekend? The one that put 2 Ferraris on top of Friday's timesheets, or the one that put a Mercedes on top of the only session that looks anything like Sunday's race? Qualifying comes first, later today, and it will reward exactly the kind of single-lap pace Ferrari has shown all Friday. But the race itself runs on the other number, the one measured over a full stint, in a car that still has not received the fix its own team has already lined up for after the summer break. Leclerc already told everyone not to expect Friday's gap to survive into Saturday. Vasseur already told everyone Sunday is a different story entirely. The people who actually build and drive these cars are not the ones getting carried away by a 1-2 on a Friday afternoon, and after what the long runs showed underneath it, maybe the rest of us should not be either. A timesheet only ever tells you who was fastest for one lap on one afternoon, with everything set up to make that one lap look as good as possible. It never tells you who is going to be fastest when it actually counts. Both of those numbers came out of the exact same Friday at the exact same circuit, and they are still pointing in opposite directions heading into Saturday. Whichever one turns out to matter more will not stay hidden for long, not with qualifying and a race weekend left to prove it one way or the other. The real test of whether the Hungaroring is actually Ferrari's track, or just a track where Ferrari looks fast for one lap at a time, starts this weekend, and it will not be finished until Sunday afternoon, once the fuel is heavy again and there is nowhere left for either number to hide.